Washington. Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Chief of Staff for Policy and a longtime ally of President Donald Trump, has ignited political and diplomatic upheaval by publicly articulating a foreign policy vision that ties Washington's aggressive posture in Venezuela to a renewed push for greater influence over Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark. The comments have provoked sharp reactions from U.S. lawmakers, European leaders, and foreign policy analysts. In a combative interview on CNN, Miller was pressed by anchor Jake Tapper about the U.S. government's future plans for Greenland, a large Arctic territory currently under Danish sovereignty. Tapper asked whether the United States would ever rule out the use of military force to bring Greenland under U.S. control. Miller did not categorically rule it out, instead suggesting no nation would militarily oppose the U.S. if it chose to pursue such an aim. Miller argued that the United States should always maintain strategic control over Greenland due to its geopolitical importance and questioned Denmark's historical claim to the territory while reaffirming Trump's long-standing desire for the island to become part of the United States. The interview also touched on the U.S. operation that removed Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro from power earlier in January. Miller used the developments in Venezuela to underscore what he described as a broader U.S. willingness to assert power where national interests are perceived to be at stake. U.S. military forces conducted airstrikes in Venezuela early in the month and captured Maduro, subsequently flying him to New York to face narco-terrorism charges in federal court, an unprecedented action that has drawn global attention and legal debate. Miller claimed that the United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere, characterizing the Venezuelan intervention as part of a renewed foreign policy approach in which Washington seeks to exert decisive influence over neighboring states. Miller's comments, particularly about Greenland, have not been received quietly abroad. Denmark's prime minister has warned that any attempt by the United States to take over Greenland would undermine NATO and decades of transatlantic security cooperation. Danish officials argue that Greenland's future should be decided by Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, not by Washington. Greenland's own prime minister echoed that sentiment, firmly rejecting comparisons between its situation and Venezuela's and calling for respect for Greenland's autonomy and international law. Across Europe, political leaders have voiced concern that the rhetoric could signal a shift away from traditional diplomacy toward a more unilateral and assertive U.S. foreign policy. In the United Kingdom, Labour leader Keir Starmer publicly backed Denmark's position that Greenland's sovereignty should be respected and independent of U.S. ambitions. Within the U.S., Miller's remarks reflect a broader divide over the Trump administration's foreign policy direction. Supporters praised the assertive use of American power and the emphasis on national security, while critics warned that such rhetoric could dangerously strain alliances and violate international norms. Some lawmakers have expressed alarm at the United States' recent military and diplomatic actions, especially the capture of a sovereign head of state in Venezuela, a move that has raised constitutional and legal questions about the scope of executive power and the administration's broader strategic intentions. The idea of the United States acquiring control over Greenland is not entirely new. U.S. leaders have entertained the notion for decades, including a failed negotiation attempt in 1946 when the U.S. offered to buy the island from Denmark after World War II. Trump himself raised the idea again in 2019 and during his recent presidential campaign, citing Greenland's strategic value in the Arctic and its natural resources. In contrast to Miller's aggressive framing, analysts note that Greenland already hosts American military bases under long-standing defense agreements, suggesting that deeper partnership is possible without jeopardizing Danish sovereignty. As tensions simmer, the United States' evolving policies toward both Venezuela and Greenland could reshape geopolitical dynamics in the Western Hemisphere and the Arctic. Miller's statements, blending rhetoric about U.S. power with pointed strategic ambitions, have brought questions of sovereignty, alliance obligations, and American influence back to the forefront of international discourse. Observers say the coming weeks will reveal whether Miller's comments represent mere political theater or are indicative of a broader, more assertive chapter in U.S. foreign policy, one with potentially far-reaching consequences for global alliances and diplomatic norms.